Okay, hi everybody. I'm sure this is the video you're going to skip, but if you're brave enough, don't be intimidated by this grass. This grass is ass. We're going to paint it in a way that simplifies the image for us as the painter, but tricks the viewer into thinking there's more going on. So what I want to do first is show you that when I traced this, I didn't include a lot of blades of grass. I included the ones that really matter, like these few in the front and these kind of little wheat sheaf looking weed parts. Those matter. Those are beautiful. So I want to preserve the light that hits them and let the background fade as it does in the photo, and then make up some of this stuff because it's a pain in the ass to have to do every single one. So I'm going to use this nice clean dry flat brush to kind of dust off some of the excess graphite from my tracing process. I've got my source right next to my image that I'm painting so that I can sight check it the whole time. But what I'm more interested in, and I'm sure once you put the tracing paper on top, you saw like, oh, I can't really trace every little thing. I can't see it all. It's good because we really want to fuzz our eyes and just see that there's a dark area here and then a light area here. It's like a line that just goes straight across with lighter values here, darker values here, and then cutting in, carving in negative space and darker values. So I'll show you how to do that in this video. But what I want to focus on first is what is the lightest value that I see in this that I can bring it all up to first. And that's going to look like this nice kind of almost blonde yellow here. So I've got some warm yellow on my palette already from something I was working on previously, those fruits, but it's very thick. So I'm just going to pour a bunch of water in it. On my palette now, you probably can't see that, but that's okay. Now I'm going to look at if I just watered down cad yellow, and I'll test a little over here just to see. Is that like a really nice light? You know, it's very yellow. I'm going to hit it with a little bit of violet because that's the opposite. Do I have violet in my kit? I do. Good. So I talk a lot about not using tube colors for your secondaries. And I mean it. But if you're just trying to tone down a little bit of yellow real quick, I mean, just a touch of tube violet isn't going to kill anybody. Using the opposite of a color to tone it helps to make it more natural. A little more violet will do. I want to be careful because yellow's so light, violet is so dark, and I don't want to bring the value down. I want this to be a very light. This is like my lightest value, so I can't let purple turn it into something dark. It's a little bit closer. It's got barely any pigment in it. But I think that's what I want. So I have some background here that I want to be aware of. It's blue, there's buildings and stuff. I'm not going to try to do all the background, but if I were to do the background, I would still lay a white, I would still lay a yellow wash over the whole thing. So to do that, I'm going to tilt my board. I have some other things drying on the same paper, which may or may not be affected. Let me check my camera, make sure you can still see at that angle. Okay, good. I'm just going to wash it flat down. Get into a bigger brush. I got a 12 here. This brush is kind of crappy looking though. I can tell it's coming towards the end of its life, but ooh, I have something slimy on it. That feels better. I don't know, sometimes my kids use my brushes at home. I love using watercolor with them because, you know, it's non-toxic, it's pretty easy to clean up, easy to set up. And once you know the concepts, it's not hard to pass that on. to kids anyways. So I'm washing this very nice, light, slightly toned hue all the way down. You see I'm feeding the bead the whole way, but then when I get to the end, I'm just going to use it up. So that way I don't have a bunch of liquid accumulated there. All right, a nice clean flat wash. I'm going to lay it down flat again. I'm patting my brush, getting the liquid off, and then I'm going to tap the bead very lightly at the end, just to pick up any extra liquid that I see accumulated in the edges. That looks nice. It's really close to this color right here, which is what I wanted, because I'm going to use that as kind of the base layer to play around with these different greens and yellows and browns. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So I had used just a tinge of some warm yellow, right? Just a very light tea wash there. I think I used some violet in there too. So let me mix that back up. Nice. It makes a nice brown for this kind of stuff, and grassy stuff. There's also kind of a burnt sienna thing going on in here, but that's a little bit darker than all these greens. So I want to do the greens first. You're kind of going from your lightest values all the way down to your darkest values. That's the order that you're painting in. And then you layer it. You do these layers to get your values in between. So I think I've made pretty close to what the yellow was. I want to get it a little bit green. And I kind of think that ultramarine is going to help me. So what I want to try to do is start to define some of these areas up in here where there's yellow and that lighter green mixing. But then the rest of it can all just be covered in this green for the most part. There might be a few little things that I want to define. So I'm actually going to start from the bottom where I know that it's going to be pretty much filled in with green. And then I'm going to start to observe some of these value changes. That was like a little light color thing there. This is kind of a little light color thing up in here. So what I'm doing is I'm not painting green blades of grass. Instead, I'm painting the greenness that's behind these little yellow blades of grass. I'm looking at my photo as reference, but I'm not trying to specifically paint any one blade of grass. I'm simply trying to define areas of light and dark so that when they start to overlap, they have this effect of blades of grass. So over here is where more of the yellow is showing. So these are the areas that I'm trying to just use the very tip of my brush to create those A shapes and V shapes. Okay, so there's our next lightest green. Try to define maybe this little thing here. Okay, so that's a good second layer for your green grass. You know, I like what I made. I think this is about a coffee wash here. And I'm going to get into, no, this is an alright brush for this part, and then I can get into my thin one. But what I want to do is start to define where it gets darker in this line right here. So there were some areas that I said from the beginning I wanted to keep light because they bridge the gap between these dark and light areas. Sort of like on our fake landscape where we did the foreground, you had like some that were silhouetted, some that were brighter than the background, and that kind of layering on top. Using that effect in this kind of painting can really help things look real. So I'm going to just start by defining some of these V shapes that I had clued into initially when I did this sketch. But now I'm really going to make it a point to define that for this edge. it doesn't have to be exactly what's in the photo. You know, you can fudge it. And the round brush gives you such tiny thin lines that it makes this kind of hatching of grass really easy. So as I get into this spot over here, I'm kind of trying to define some areas that look like grass is overlapping. It's those little ends that are the hardest part. Now, since it lightens over here, it works that I have this really light wash going. And it gets really fuzzy and turns into nothing back there. So it's just going to be some like very light little thin brush strokes up and down. Not connecting, because we're not painting the blades. We're painting what's behind them. So it's this very kind of back and forth kind of scribbling motion. But you can see that that area has filled out nicely. Now, as things get darker on this side, I'm going to try to punch up my mix with a little bit more burnt umber to make things darker. If you're trying to make things darker and cooler colors like blues and greens, burnt umber is your bestie. So this was already a little moist. Now I'm kind of almost getting into painting short, but it's still kind of wet. It's all right. I want this to be fuzzy. This area over here, as it gets darker, I want it to be really nice and defined. See, so I'm trying to not paint those little blades that were in my tracing. I traced those ones because those were the ones that were like, okay, this is why I took the photo. You know, if you're painting from photo, consider that. You know, what was my motivation for taking this photo this way? What are those things that are so important to me? And that can help you figure out what to trace and what to just leave. Because, you know, you don't want to trace every single blade of grass. I mean, maybe you do, but if you don't, this is one way to get around it. Okay, so now we're coming into this kind of shadow area here where things are dark, and then some blades are silhouetted up onto the light area. See what I mean? So you have that kind of top part where you're carving out the lighter spaces and negative space, but then these darker areas, they kind of shoot upward as well. As like they're grass, some of them are silhouetted grass, some of them are like empty space for grass. But this kind of shadow area here is important to help us understand what the light is doing. We have that kind of brown area. I'm going to come back to that part. I might mix a little on the paper there though. There were some larger areas, some larger shapes that were darker in my photo that I defined so that I can get a general idea of where the largest pieces of grass are starting to point, and then where around them I need more, that I can just fudge it with brushstroke. So coming into this bottom area here, that's the part that has a little brown to it that I want to remember to come back to while it's still wet. Now, as I get on this side, I'm going to charge in a little bit more of that wet paint so that way I can join some wet areas and keep going. Now, there's some areas that I defined over here. This is the toughest part, looking at your sketch, is like, why did I outline that? Because sometimes you look at it in the photo and you say, that's not even a thing, you know? So having your photo right next to you is important, which is why I'm always stressing that idea of printing out your source. So I don't want these values to get messed up in the drying process. I'm going to kind of try to pick up a little bit of that liquid. That's nice. And then what did I say? In that area there's something brown going on. I get a little puddle of brown for myself for that. Now, if I came into this area with some really wet, you know, really watery paint, it would wash it out. So you want to try to match the viscosity. If you're punching in other colors in an area, I see some opportunities where I can drop in a little bit more of this brown and it will kind of help. Sorry, the source was going down. But I'm gonna cut in on a thicker layer next for some more definition. Now before I call this thing done, I do see some areas where I could go in and define some spots a little bit better. So I'm gonna get my little tiny baby little brush. Make sure it doesn't have too much liquid on it. Be careful that I'm not putting my hands on the paper. This paint isn't very thick for some reason. I must have got some water in it. Ah, I see what happened. It all flowed away. Okay. So I tried to throw some brown in my mix to darken it back up since I kind of lost my puddle here. And it didn't exactly give me what I wanted, but it gave me another background color to deal with and work with. My paint is not thick enough and I really can't keep going until I fix that. So let me just do that real quick. It all like ran down into a little puddle area. Try to salvage it. That's a little bit better. That'll do. So all these areas this area here, I can see in my photo has a lot going on. So I didn't want to leave that blank. I just need to make up those shapes. There are A's, V's, and then kind of like weird rhombus that have a side that's more or less than the other. So I can see already as this dries that my paint thickness was different. Maybe it was a little more watery than what was already down or vice versa. But when you drop in wet on wet stuff and you mix in the paper, you got to make sure that, well, you just want to keep an eye on what your water content is in your liquid. So how much pigment to how much liquid ratio. Alrighty, that looks like a good layer for that. We'll see if we can define it a little bit better. Okay, let's come back to this one, the grass. I accidentally dropped my brush right there, so oops, that's okay. I want to see if some of that green I made kind of dried up a bit. Give me a little something darker to work with. Let's see. I'm going to test it off to the side. Let me make sure that my camera's on. Okay, good. We're good. You can see. Excellent. All right. So now we really want to darken in those really darkest areas. And we can come in and create some little shapes that, like I said in the last one, can look like the holes between. This needs to darken up. I'm going to add a little bit of black. There we go, that's better. So I'm really looking at the photo, but I'm not trying to paint everything I see in the photo. I'm trying to paint in these areas that are darker using the painting short method, which is where you're just you're painting in the same area, but you're painting it a little darker and a little smaller. Like it doesn't reach all the boundaries that you had originally placed. And with grass, it's cool because on each layer you can come in and add more of these shapes, these like in between grass shapes, and that helps to give you the layered look of grass crossing. It's tricky because, you know, you usually think about the shape of the thing, what it is. So it's hard to shift your perspective and think about the shape of, you know, tracing the edge of that shape as opposed to drawing the shape itself. It's tricky, but, you know, like I'm doing here, I'm just kind of doing little scribbly strokes that make V shapes, A shapes, and little rhombus shapes. And that start to fade out as they get further back. Like all this stuff further back can just get filled in. And then you really see like a blade of grass look like a blade of grass. If I can get the edge. Oh, I lost it. Dang, that's okay. Here's one. You know, they're just like made up. Unfortunately, when I dropped my brush earlier, it landed right on the star of my show here. Let me see if I can fix that. I can just make it like there's something growing on top, right? These areas came out really light, so I can come back in and dab into those a bit more. You get a little looser in some areas and get some overlap that's really nice. Kind of gives you that effect of multiple layers of grass coming through. There's that dark shadow area over here that was important. But it can fade into obscurity as well. So it's important as the artist, you have artistic license to choose what you include and what you don't. And a lot of the reason why we leave stuff out is because it's complicated in a way that doesn't serve our purpose. If I'm trying to show you this one beautiful blade of grass, this creation, this just amazing little thing about nature, and it's just the one blade of grass, or few, you know, then painting all the unimportant ones is just going to waste my time and draw attention away from what could be the most important thing in the composition. I love Robert Henri because he gives us those practical ideas in his book, The Art Spirit, when he talks about the background. He talks a lot about painting portraiture, and so he really stresses that idea that the thing that is your focal point, the thing that you're painting or making a portrait of or whatever, that's the thing that you're meditating on as an artist, and so that's the thing that should be the most realized in the composition. So now that I have some wet areas that can kind of blast out a little bit with some pigment, I'll try to throw some in areas. I've got black on my brush, so I'm just kind of trying to fill in areas that make them look really dark now. The more value that you push, the more real it's going to look. Make your white super white. Ooh, I put my hand on there. Ouch. Make your white super white, your black super black, and then it will really look like light. It's amazing how it happens. I mean, one way that you can practice negative space painting, is to paint something very light and then paint the outline, the edges around it, kind of like I did with the tree. Sorry, I lost our photo, but this is probably about as close as I'd want you to get with it. If you're painting grass like this in a foreground of your landscape, this same kind of technique can be used in a way that simplifies a large space.